that track you mentioned in Canada, what was it called again?
Trois-Rivières. So it's the basically the street circuit in Trois-Rivières is a town which means three rivers in English. So it's kind of at the mouth of the St. Lawrence at the side of one of the big rivers, basically that leads down from the ocean to Montreal, and
Mm.
kind of there's two rivers that kind of connect to the St. Lawrence, so that's why it's called Three Rivers. But it's a really cool old historic race, and like I said, the whole town comes out, and it's a big spectator, and draw. And my dad actually won there in Trans Am in the '90s, and a lot of people still remember him just for that one race. People just I think he was inducted into the Walk of Fame there in Trois Rivières, and for a guy from Ontario, that's a big deal in Quebec. So there's always a rivalry between at least in our series, between the Quebec and Ontario drivers. But the Quebec people love racing, and they've always for whatever reason really liked my dad. So I'm hoping that extends to me as well, because my wife is French Canadian, so I'm working on my French.
Isn't that the same track where Rick Mears had his ankle shunting crash or whatever?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't know if it was that. Would that have been an IndyCar race?
I think IndyCar, yeah, because Rick
I don't know
Mears.
if IndyCar ever raced there. I know they raced. There's a tri-oval outside Montreal called San Air. Um,
Oh,
that would
it
have
may have
been,
been San Air, I think. I
yeah.
remember reading
That
about that with Mears, so that's
that
probably it.
that may have been the era. Yeah, that's a really cool track. That was probably the biggest oval that we had in Canada. I don't think that it's still operational, which is sad. It's kind of like kind of Dale Junior's, lost race tracks or speedways or whatever. It's kind of these things kind of fall through the cracks sometimes, and there's a lot of history there at that track, and it'd be a great track for us to have in our series, because the biggest track we have is a half mile, and I think that was 7/8 of a mile. Like, it was a pretty big track for us in Canada. So.
Do you enjoy street races best or the regular tracks?
I think I so far I've had better results on the street courses, and I think it's a bit of an equalizer because you don't have all the testing capabilities or possibilities. The thing about the race at Mosport and Canadian Tire, the Mosport Grand Prix track at Canadian Tire Motorsport Park is pretty much everybody has a lot of test time there, and people get their cars really dialed in for that track. And I'm on that track all the time. Obviously, I drive it a lot, and I know the track really well, but I haven't had a ton of time for whatever reason, specifically, testing a car there. So for me, the street circuits are an equalizer because we haven't had a huge budget, up until this season to do real testing. So kind of going to a track where you kind of have to make a guess. Like for us, Trois Riviere, we were able to kind of guess on exactly what gear ratios we wanted, and how we wanted to do our kind of our front our shocks and our front and rear sway bar, and the stiffness that we wanted, and blah blah blah, and it worked really well. So and I think that's like the Chicago race. It's unique. It's a slightly different style of driving, I think, than permanent road courses. Because when you're working in between really tight walls, you have to be super careful and close, but you have to be fast, and it's a bit of a different technique for that. So I really enjoy the street courses. There's one literally, I'm in Toronto. There's one literally I was out for a run today, and I ran past the racetrack. It's the track at Exhibition Place where they have the Toronto Indies. So um, that's a super cool track. And for me to be able to, literally race down the streets that I drive, on a regular basis is kind of weird. The very first time we do it in practice, I'm always like, this is strange. I'm going down the Lakeshore Drive, as they call it here in Toronto, at 160 miles an hour, and the speed limit there is, I think, 60 kilometers an hour. So it's a lot different.
I I have experience with a street race. A couple
Oh,
years
cool.
ago I went to Nashville for the Music City Grand Prix, the very first
Okay.
one. Did you hear about that?
I've watched some of those races on TV. Yeah, that looks like a super tight and interesting track. Yeah.
I was there for the very first one, and I had I had unquestionably the greatest racing experience ever that weekend. I was there
Okay.
for both IndyCar, Trans Am, Stadium Super Trucks, and even the GT America Series.
Oh wow, yeah, that's an awesome schedule.
It was an awesome weekend, and I have a funny story from it. I met Roger Penske, and
Oh,
I met him by accident. What happened was I was standing in an open field talking with a friend of mine that went to the race. IndyCar practice had ended, and she wasn't really aware of what the IndyCar sport was about. So I was telling her a bit some facts on it in an empty field, and I backed myself up like this without realizing that a golf cart was coming up. And so
oh no.
I ended up getting hit accidentally and I fell to the ground, and not enough to injure me, but I mean, there was a bruise the next day, but that's all it was.
Right.
And then I stood up and saw that it was Roger Penske. And when I realized it, I was like, "Holy cow!" Because
Yeah.
when I was on the ground, I was thinking, "Okay, what idiot just chose to run over me like that?" And then when I realized who it was, my attitude obviously changed. And I was like, "No worries, man, but can I have a picture?"
Yeah, yeah. That's probably a good time to ask for a picture,
Yeah, it's the
yeah.
least you could have done.
That is hilarious, yeah.
I have the picture actually up there on my wall right there, autographed by Penske afterwards.
Oh, nice. Yeah. That is
And
super
I
cool.
It was very cool. And I actually met other people as well there. I met little Al Unser
Oh,
Jr.
wow.
I also had a meeting with some of the GT and Trans Am drivers, and I saw
Okay.
that there was Boris Said and Tony Abe participating, and then and then afterwards there was somebody else. Just I need to remember who it was. Oh yeah, I didn't meet him, but while I was on the grandstands on the at the start finish line in front of the pit lane, I had a glimpse from my binoculars of Mario Andretti.
Oh, wow.
It was the closest I came to Mario, and hopefully I'll meet him again down the road when I attend more races. But
Yeah.
nonetheless, it was pretty cool to see him from my binoculars.
Yeah. So when my dad was inducted into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame, I think it was 2013 or so. They usually they have an international person who they also induct who's had an impact on Canadian racing, and Mario Andretti won a lot of races in Canada in IndyCar, and I don't know if he ever won a Canadian Grand Prix in F1. I'd have to look that up, but I know in IndyCar he won a lot of races and on the streets of Toronto at least, and so they had inducted him into the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame the same year as my dad. So when we were kind of backstage before the whole ceremony, I got to meet Mario, and he was wearing. I remember I kind of spotted him because I was kind of everyone was sitting on couches with their kind of their feet up, and I noticed I was looking around and I just see a pair of really nice black like Italian loafers and checkered flag socks, and I kind of followed the socks up to who it was, and it's Mario Andretti, and I was like, wow, that's so cool. I got to meet him a little bit and kind of talk, and he talked about some of the old stories racing at Mosport and Montreal and F1 and the Toronto Indy, and just kind of the old glory days back then, and super nice guy, obviously one of the all-time greats, probably the great. So
I would agree. He did have a love-hate affair with Indianapolis, though. Have you heard about that?
well, I know he only won one time, right? So
Yeah.
he's had a lot of bad luck, and I know his son should have won a couple of times, and so there's sometimes it's there's a bit of a curse out there, and it's but even just to say that you won it once is a big deal. So I'm sure he's just like I was telling you earlier, you get guys who they finish top five or top on the podium, and you still, wish that you were the top step. So I know there's for him, races that he wish he would have won, and at Indianapolis for sure. You're always, but I mean, to even just to finish in the top 10 at the Indy 500 is a big deal. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. So, how's your Pinty's series doing so far?
Yeah, pretty. I mean, this year we started our own team, like I said, and we kind of we only did 5 or 6 races this year, and we bought this car, and the car was, we basically bought it right before the race in Toronto, and we were running around the top 10 in Toronto basically the whole race, and I think we were seventh in practice. Pretty much the first time we had ever put the car, on track. And we got the car the week before. It was a rush to try to get it ready. It was basically didn't do anything with the car, and we were pretty competitive right away. And so we were all looking forward to doing some updates to the car. We put it in a new engine. We updated the braking system. And it's just one of those things where, for whatever reason, the races after that, we had about 3 or 4 races after that, and just had mechanical issues like the whole year basically after that race in Toronto. So it was really frustrating, and especially Trois Rivières, where I had such a good race there 2 years ago. I was going back this year, thinking. I finished, sixth in a car that, I think, it took more effort to drive maybe than some of the cars further up the grid, and hoping that we had a better package, and just didn't weren't competitive, just struggling for whatever reason with power, just seeing, drivers just pull away in a straight line. So, you're kind of in tough when you're in practice, and you see that you've got a power problem, because you can be a great driver, but on most tracks, there are some tracks that maybe are an exception, but for the most part, if you don't have power, you really you can't be in the same ball game. So we kind of dealt with that for the last 3 races of the year, and man, that was tough, mentally frustrating, driving around kind of by yourself. I'm still, faster than maybe some of the drivers at the back of the pack, but kind of by myself because I can't keep up to the even the mid pack with my the power issues that we were having. So when you're just driving around for 50, 60 laps, just trying to bring the car home, and like you in that go-kart race, I was thinking maybe everyone ahead of me will crash, and I'll be able to win this thing, because you just never know. So it was super mentally draining and tough this year. But there's some quote somewhere, failure is the failure is the whatever of success. So I mean, you have to fail to be able to get up and go further and do better. And you know I've I think Michael Jordan is the number one example of that. A guy who failed a lot as a younger person, and is an all-time great in his sport and in the sporting world. So you just try to keep your head up, and get back to the work. And we've done a little bit of testing already in the off season, just trying to sort out the problems, and make sure that we come back bigger and better. So it's tough, man. Like I said, it's racing is the highs are high, and the lows are very, very low. So it's but that's why we love it. It's like a drug, really. So it's just a very special sport to me and to my family, and constantly want to do well. So